You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron, live with Ethan Hristodoulou.
What's up, everyone, and welcome back to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Hristodoulou, and today, following an absolutely absurd Week 9 in the USFL with some pretty wild results, we're diving into the power rankings following Week 9, recapping the games, giving my thoughts and opinions on where I think all 8 of these teams stand as we move into a very tight Week 10, where pretty much everybody is on the table regarding the USFL playoffs. There's really only one team who is just about mathematically eliminated, and we'll get into that when we get to them. But make sure you comment down below. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on my power rankings. Give me your power rankings. How do you feel after this past weekend's games? Who do you think is going to come out victorious next weekend? What do you think the USFL playoffs are going to look like after Week 10 wraps up? I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on everything, but let's dive right into it, shall we? Beginning with the 2 bottom teams, we'll reveal them 2 at a time as we always do, beginning with number 8 and number 7. All the way sitting at the bottom, and they've been here for quite a while, we have ourselves the Michigan Panthers, and then at number 7, we're looking at the Pittsburgh Maulers. So the Panthers losing 19-7 to that number 7 Pittsburgh Maulers team. Offense coming to a screeching halt. No Reggie Corbin really hurts the team. They wound up altogether as a team with just 15 carries by their running backs for 50 yards and 3.3 yards per carry. It was not a good day offensively. Couple that with the fact that Josh Love had 4 interceptions on the afternoon. The only real bright spot and thing you can take away that was positive regarding the offense is probably tight end Cole Hikutini, who I brought up a couple of weeks ago, was starting to have a little bit of a quiet emergence for the Panthers. He had 6 catches for 80 yards and a touchdown, but outside of that, there was not a lot to like about what we saw with the Panthers offensively beyond the beginning of the game. Defensively, though, they did look good, but this has kind of been the story of the Panthers for a large part of the season. A really good defense with an offense that you just don't quite know what you're going to get from them, and that's why I still have them sitting all the way at the bottom. You run into a Maulers team that offensively has not been great themselves, and you have a shot where, your offense has looked pretty good, but then it comes out that Reggie Corbin's not going to play, and it feels like just a complete lack of preparedness of what you were going to do on the offense minus Reggie Corbin, and it really showed in this game. Really tough one to watch for the Panthers. We'll see what happens with them next week. They are still in the running as everybody in the North has an opportunity to find themselves into the playoffs, but right now, I look at the Panthers, and I probably see the least likely of the 4 teams in there. I could eat my words on that one, but I just don't know. As for the Pittsburgh Maulers at number 7, like I said, they found their win 19-7 over that same number 8 Panthers team. Talk about completely embarrassing the offense of the Panthers in what was a must-win game for them. They had to come out and win this game, and the defense stepped up big time. Before we dive into that, though, I do want to make sure I shout out the return team for the Pittsburgh Maulers, a group that has steadily gotten better and better each and every single week. And while you can say what you want about the coverage of the team, I will say this. The return men have done an excellent job setting up an offense that's really struggled to move the ball and get themselves into the end zone, and at least making things a little bit easier for them. Offensive line woes continue with this Pittsburgh Maulers team. They had 6 sacks allowed in this game and 11 tackles for loss. It just felt like the offensive line was a giant sand sieve, and that might even be a little bit too generous to call them because of just how poorly they have been playing throughout the entirety of the season, but in this game specifically as well against a Panthers front 7 that is really good when they get going. I want to shout out that return team because if it wasn't for them setting them up constantly where they are, like when you look at Josh Simmons' opening 64-yard return, this could be a team that had absolutely no shot of making the playoffs this year, but the return game has been like a big piece as to why they at least even have a chance to sneak their way into the playoffs. But defensively, I mean, this has been the Maulers week in and week out. They have just been an absolute unit. They had 5 sacks on the night, 7 tackles for loss, 8 passes defense. They had 4 interceptions, making Josh Love look absolutely silly. In the last couple of weeks where he started to kind of what looked like find his footing, be nothing but just a fluke is basically how they made it look. The Maulers defense is great. The offense, very mixed bag. They just have a hard time getting themselves into the end zone. They move a lot. They really do. Troy Williams presents a bit of a headache, and even Madre London looked pretty good. He had 4.2 yards per carry in this game. So it was a pretty solid showing. They just, again, struggled to get into the end zone. This Maulers team, if they could just finish off drives and not kick field goals, vastly different team, and I think they'd be in a vastly different position going into this Week 10 playoff situation where everybody is on the table for joining the playoffs. Now, moving into the next two teams, this is where we're going to start to see some really big changes in my power rankings, and I'll openly admit this right now. Based on my power rankings last week, I was hanging on to teams being in certain spots that I honestly wasn't too sold on myself, but there was me being a Breakers fan, holding them where I had them because I wasn't too sure about them, and then also looking at like a Showboats defense that was just unbelievable through 5 weeks. I was letting my judgment and trying to avoid being too much of a fan and some other things kind of get in the way. And so this is why we're going to start to see some massive changes here. But I'll openly admit that. I mean, power rankings, they are what they are. They're for fun. They're for discussion. And I mean, who takes them that seriously now, really? But at number 6, speaking of the Showboats, we're going to see them there. And then at number 5, the Generals sliding up quite a bit on the board here after a massive victory. But first, the Showboats. I want to say getting exposed is probably the best way to put this against the New Orleans Breakers. And again, to give you an idea, last week, the Breakers were at number 5. You'll see they're not at number 5 right now, obviously, because the Generals are there. And the Showboats were my number 2 team last week. I bought in a little bit too much in the Showboats defense, and I'll openly admit that. But I will also say that I was not necessarily super sold on what we were getting from them offensively, but it felt like the running game was starting to establish with the Showboats, and they were starting to find some success. But I was a little bit shaky on Cole Kelly, and with the Breakers defense being as good as it's been pretty much all year, they only allowed 17 points against the Showboats the last time these two teams played, and there was a lot going wrong for the Breakers in that game. Ultimately, they came into this one, and it was basically a revenge game for them and kind of slapped the Showboats right in the mouth. Cole Kelly had 3 interceptions. He had that fumble snap that went right into a pick 6 to Vontae Diggs. I mean, you had 14 total carries from your running backs, 3 from Kareth White, and 11 to Juwan Washington. And like I said, the running game was starting to find itself. They had 100-plus yards the last couple of weeks and just completely went away from all of that, as if like none of that was going on. So it just felt very like they just moved away from everything that had made them successful. And I don't know if it's just because they fell behind and then they felt like they needed to kind of go like, you know, haymaker for haymaker through the air. But your strength was possession of the football, controlling the ball, you leaning on your running game to open things up in your passing game. And I feel like the Showboats just completely went away from that. So it was unfortunate because the defense really good. They had 4 sacks. They only allowed 170 total yards. Granted, the Breakers were taking advantage of every turnover and then just going to the end zone with it. But I mean, the defense played really well when you, like, all things considered, you were just putting the defense in awful spots every single time they had to step onto the field. But again, I don't know what happened, but I feel like the offense got exposed and this team kind of altogether got exposed. The 5-week streak of just them winning games improbably was really fun to watch, but I think the Breakers and the Stallions kind of separated themselves this weekend with their victories and kind of gave you a reason to believe why they're the teams that'll probably be representing the South in the playoffs based on how everything kind of shakes out next week. But it was not a great look and a steep drop for the Showboats. Again, 4 spots falling on my power rankings this week. And then the Generals. I did not think that DeAndre Johnson was going to play in this game. So when I picked the Stars over the Generals, my thought process was they're not going to have DeAndre Johnson. We're going to see what Dakota Prukop is going to do. And it almost feels like the Stars defense was kind of anticipating that same thing. I thought that DeAndre Johnson was going to be just working through the concussion protocol and he was probably not going to be playing. And then all of a sudden, DeAndre Johnson's active for the game. He comes in and just completely lights it up. He has 242 yards altogether total between on the ground and through the air. He was 15 of 20, wheeling and dealing all game long. He looked fantastic and breathed life back into an offense that feels like it had its identity snatched away when he got taken out of the game a few weeks ago, and then it ended up being missing action for the last few weeks. Running back Darius Victor, solid game from him. I should say more than solid, honestly. He did an excellent job in this game here. He was 11 carries for 51 yards. He had a couple of rushing touchdowns. He had the trick play for the passing touchdown to Bowman. I mean, Mike Riley came into this game, especially knowing that DeAndre Johnson was going to play, and threw everything and the kitchen sink at this Stars defense. And it was very clear that the Stars were not ready for what was coming. And I don't think a lot of people were ready for what we saw. Miscues late in the game allowed the Stars to get back in. That is probably my biggest concern about the Generals right now, is just getting out of their own way. This is a team that I feel like has kind of struggled with that here or there throughout the season. But I mean, you had the defensive pass interference on 4th and 12 when the Stars were trying to get into, after kicking the field goal to, what was it, like 37, 33 at that point. 4th and 12, they're trying to convert so they can drive down and potentially steal a victory. You have the DPI on 4th and 12. You have a horse collar penalty that happened on that same drive, a 4th and 2 that was failed before the Stars were able to score the touchdown that put them to 30. Like, there was a lot of things happening in that 4th quarter that let the Stars get back in and allowed that game. And it was weird because this is a really good defense from the Generals, but a lot was going on. So defense continues to be great. Some miscues had me a little bit concerned, but if this is the Generals team that we're seeing here, this is also possibly a Generals team that we're going to be seeing in the playoffs in just a couple of weeks, because this is the Generals that I think a lot of people thought we were going to be seeing these next few weeks as the offense was really starting to get rolling. And now they looked as good as they did right there. Might take another massive game where they have to call some wacky plays like they did this week, but whatever gets you into the playoffs, right? That's pretty much the mindset of the Generals right now. And I think, it worked really well this week. Try it again next week. As for the next two teams we're looking at here, working through the top half of the league now, at number 4, we are looking at the Houston Gamblers, and then at number 3, the Philadelphia Stars. So the Gamblers lose 38-15 in a pretty wild contest where it was close up until the end, where in that 4th quarter, the Stallions just kind of ran wild all over them. Costly mistakes, obviously. They just throw the game away essentially here. I mean, the delay of game before settling for 3, Kenji Bahar fumbling late in the game to really put things away. Offensively, just somewhat of a mess. I mean, even Mark Thompson, he was getting absolutely beat up in this game. You saw him get up multiple times really slow. He had 17 carries for only 56 yards. This is probably one of the worst games we saw from Mark Thompson this year, and that's kind of surprising because the Stallions' run defense hasn't necessarily been like the greatest by any means. They've been fairly average when you compare them to the rest of the league here, but they did an excellent job shutting down Mark Thompson, and this game went about as bad as you could have imagined for the Gamblers here. And when I picked this game, I actually picked the Stallions to win. It was the one game I got right this past week. I go 4-0 one week, and then the following week I go 1-3. I feel like I know what's going on, and then I don't. But this game felt like a very big revenge game, and this is our division type game for the Stallions. And I've looked at the Gamblers and thought, very competitive team. But to show up to that game the way you did and just get absolutely mollywopped late, it almost felt like the stage was a little too bright for them, and that has to cause a little bit of concern. I do think I still think that the Gamblers are one of the better teams, hence having them in the top half of the USFL right now. But I came away with that game concerned a little bit about a few different things, be it just Kenji Bahar being able to, handle the situation when the lights are on bright. I don't really know if I agree with benching him in that situation, especially being this close to the playoffs. I feel like I understand the thought process, but not something I would have done unless he got hurt. I don't remember them saying anything about that, but I don't really agree with that. I know Montel Kozar gave a little bit of a spark. He had that 27-yard run or whatever the distance was for it, but just not the type of game you want to have when you're 2 weeks out from the playoffs and fighting for a playoff spot. And then at number 3, the Philadelphia Stars. I've got to say this. Offensive line is probably going to be what makes or breaks this team and allows them to push into the playoffs next week. If they cannot protect Case Cookus, who another person that I felt like I was seeing just get absolutely beat up throughout the entirety of the game, whether he was limping or holding a rib, he was in the tent for a little bit towards late in the game. I don't know if Case Cookus is going to survive trying to make his push through the playoffs here. I'm really concerned about this offensive line because it felt like they kind of found themselves a little bit, and maybe, being down late and by as much as they were makes things more predictable. It's going to be a pass, so you can rush knowing you're facing a passing play more than anything else. But if this offensive line can't protect Case Cookus, this team does not go minus Case Cookus because he is an absolute stud, and he is a big reason why they are where they are. Yes, you have guys like Corey Coleman who've been playing out of their mind as well, but I don't think the offense and the production they have is possible minus Case Cookus, who this week had 59 yards on the ground. He also had 263 through the air with 3 passing touchdowns. This offense lives and breathes through Case Cookus, very similar to how the Stars do with Alex Magoo. They've got to keep him upright. Otherwise, the Stars can kiss any shot at representing the North goodbye, never mind pushing for a North spot in the USFL Championship. On top of that, defense has to get better as well. It did not do a good job defending the run. It felt like Darius Victor was bullying them at times, despite the fact that he only had like 50-something yards. The plays where he was gaining yards and he was also making plays on those downs where it mattered most, it felt like he was bullying the defensive front. They allowed 365 yards altogether. Defense has got to play tighter, especially going into this next week here, if they want to find themselves in the playoffs. And then for the final two teams, ranking at the very top, two Southern Division teams, we are looking at the New Orleans Breakers and the Birmingham Stallions. Breakers being at number 2, Stallions holding on to that top spot as they've been there for the last few weeks. The Breakers win over the Showboats. I think this was a much-needed victory for them. This game right here looked like the Breakers team that we were seeing way back early in the season that's been kind of MIA up until this point. They've gone back to a more balanced attack. They're not shying away from Wes Hills per se, but they've integrated him into the offense in a more efficient and effective manner where it's not like Wes Hills is getting the ball, but it's we've got to account for Wes Hills to be getting the ball because we also have Jonathan Adams and Johnny Dixon to account for as well on the outside and Sage Surratt catching something over the middle, whatever it may be. This was a very complete game by them. And the offense didn't even really have to do too much. It was really the defense that was just slaughtering the Showboats. I mean, 5 sacks, you had 2 fumbles, you had 8 passes defensed, 3 interceptions, one of them being Devontae Diggs' pick 6 we mentioned earlier. And then the offense did an excellent job of just taking advantage of all of the really good situations the defense kept putting them into. You had 24 points following either defensive forced turnovers or like turnover on down situations. 24 points off your opponent's mistakes. That is winning football and the exact type of play you need to have when you know that you're potentially going to be playing the Stallions in a couple of weeks, because right now I really feel like it's going to be Stallions and Breakers, but that's the exact type of play you want to see from a team if you have, playoff aspirations and you have a championship aspiration. That's the type of defensive football you want to have. I will say this though, offensively, like I said, they did a good job of taking advantage of mistakes, but 5 offensive drives did go for 5 plays or less when they weren't being put into these really good situations. Little bit concerning, but I don't want to sit there and act like, the end is nigh. I mean, you still did put up, like I said, 24 points over your defense's or your opposing team's offense's mistakes. Just a little bit concerning that the plays that or the drives that weren't setting you up for really good positioning just were kind of flopping left and right. So something to keep an eye on, but really good team effort altogether. Again, great job taking advantage by the Breakers offense. Excellent game by the defense from start to finish. And then the Stallions at number 1, like I mentioned when we were talking the Gamblers, I mean, you want to talk about just going into a game, and this is another revenge game for them because you had the same situation going up against the Breakers, and the Breakers obviously played them a lot better in that second game, but ultimately lost. The Stallions have been kind of on a revenge tour here, reminding everyone who they are. Alex Magoo just continues his run as the league's MVP. If he doesn't win MVP, I don't know who does, because at this point, like, everyone else has had like a game or two here and there, especially in this back half where it kind of knocks you out of the like running for it. This is Alex Magoo's award to lose at this point. He had 3 more scores, 2 through the air, 1 on the ground. I mean, just talk about an absolute phenom in the USFL right now. He's been unbelievable. And then you couple that with like CJ Marable, who, again, I talked about this going into this game here. Do not forget about CJ Marable because he can do so much in so many different ways. Killing it on the return game. 4 kick returns. He had 120 yards. He was averaging 30 a return. He had 12 carries for 32 yards and a touchdown. He had 3 catches for 37. CJ Marable has evolved into a I can do everything for you type of player. And whether he's putting up massive numbers on offense or he's being a huge factor in the return game, this is a guy that defenses cannot forget about because he's going to make you pay, and he definitely did against the Gamblers here. But the defense, I want to praise them because I think a lot of people are concerned about them with just the players that they've been missing and whatnot, but continuing to just bend but not be willing to break, to force the Gamblers into a situation where you're only able to muster up 15 points off of 5 field goals. Excellent job by the Stallions. This was a game that I was a little bit concerned about for the Stallions. I did pick the Stallions to win, but you just look at how the defense has been, and they've been somewhere around like average to maybe slightly above average at times. It just depends on the week and what we've seen, but they've stepped up when it's mattered most. And I think that's something that gets a little bit lost when you start looking at the numbers and you look at games in totality, but they're stepping up when it matters most. And that's something that, you can't forget about. Yes, it sucks that Scooby Wright has not been allowed to play for whatever the reason is. I don't really understand that whole situation, but he has not been allowed to rejoin the team yet, being on the IR or whatever it is. They're missing a player or two here and there, but other players have stepped up, and a guy like Quentin Poling, the linebacker, 11 tackles, 2 tackles for loss. He had half a sack, an interception, a pass defense. Do you want to talk about a guy doing absolutely anything and everything to help your defense out? Well-deserved Defensive Player of the Week honor for him. Second time he's earned that award. This defense, this offense, the Stallions team as a whole, from offense to the defense to the special teams, complete and total package, and a big reason why I have them ranked at number 1. Those are my power rankings following week number 9. Again, comment down below. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on mine. Give me yours. Recap this week, all that and more. I'd love to hear your opinions. But that is it from me. I appreciate you if you made it to the end of the video. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.